So, good afternoon. I'm Jon Mundy, and this is what we call Miracles in Manhattan. We started doing this a little over 6 years ago. We spent 3 years going very carefully, chapter by chapter, every chapter in A Course in Miracles, and then that ended in June of 2016. And since that time, I've been just taking different topics, plus I've been having guests that come on and teach with me. And one of the first guests I invited to come on back 3 years ago was Dr. Rod Chelberg, who's standing next to me, and 3 years is enough. It's time for him to be back here with us, and I'll introduce Rod more formally in just a moment. A couple of personal announcements. I have a group that meets in my home up in Orange County, but this last year I taught a couple of classes on Zoom, and they went so well that I decided I do a lot of traveling and, you know, airplanes and rental cars, and it all gets to be I'm taking off on Thursday for Canada and Michigan, and well, it's just a lot of traveling, right? But when you teach a class on Zoom, you just sit right there at your desk. It costs nothing. And it works out very well that you can talk to. One of the classes I taught this last year had somebody in Ireland, Australia, and Mongolia. Okay? So that was really kind of going around the world. So what this is leading to is I'm going to start a class. It's going to start on Tuesday evenings at 8 o'clock Eastern Standard Time. You'd have to figure out where that was if you live in a different time zone. And in a way, it's going to be kind of introductory material in the beginning, but in addition to that, in addition to that, one of the questions that I think that Rod's going to be addressing today, which we all really think about, according to the Course in Miracles, we are all, as I said a moment ago, God's voice speaks to me all through the day. We're all receiving communication. And the question is, why don't we do what we're being asked to do? Why don't we pay even more attention to what? Because if you really paid attention, this is the happiest way home. I mean, this is joyful. There's nothing better than following God's plan for salvation, which we, of course, call GPS. So that's what the series is going to be. It's going to be 6 weeks long. It costs $90, but there are scholarships available. All you got to do is just call me up and say, or send me an email and say, I'd like a scholarship, and we will give you a scholarship. So just check it out. Go to our website. Our website is miraclesmagazine.org. Very easy to find. Enough about that. So let's get to Dr. Rod and why we're here today. So a little bit about how we met. We actually met through a mutual friend, Mari Perrone, who was the scribe of A Course of Love. I had been up to Mari lives in Minneapolis. I'd been up there to give a lecture in 2009. Read her first book at that point. And then Rod was also in dialogue with Mari. Mm-hmm. And Mari suggested that he make contact with me, which happened. And it's just been a wonderfully exciting developmental relationship and friendship over these years. And it just keeps getting deeper and better. And a little bit about Rod's background. Rod is a MD. He was in charge of an ER for 14 years, which is pretty strenuous, as you can well imagine. And he finally reached burnout, as everybody does eventually on that one. And Then he was in charge of 4 nursing homes and a hospice center up in Bangor, Maine, which with all the nursing homes and the hospice center combined, it really meant that Rod was writing death certificates just about every day. And it also means that I, having known this guy, this is the guy you want beside your bed when you're getting ready to exit planet Earth and go on a trip to someplace else, right? When we leave this shell, this husk behind. Literally prayed with his patients, prays with the family if they were receptible to it. But also during the time he's going to be telling you these stories, I'm not going to tell them, just give you a hint, about receiving guidance in the ER in terms of how to handle different emergency type situations, right? But the other thing about Rod is that he's been a Course in Miracles student for a long, not just the Course in Miracles. The Course in Miracles certainly has been central and golden in his life, but also A Course of Love, Joel Goldstein, and just a lot of other literature in this whole same field that we're all exploring, right? And so he used to go to church a lot, but he found that what was happening at church was people, Doc, I've got this thing in my, and it would happen so frequently, and he was actually went to 2 or 3 different churches, and it's always going on there. So he decided to stay home on Sunday mornings, and it would take an hour to go there and spend an hour there and come back 2 hours. So he'd just meditate during that same time. See if that would be a more of a spiritual experience, and that's what happened. And not only was he meditating, but he was receiving God's voice, speaking to him, right? I think I've said enough. We will go now for 1 hour. We'll go till 2:45, and we'll take our break. Rod, take over.
Thank you. Thank you so much, everyone. This is really quite an honor for me, and to be able to come and see a city. Bangor, Maine, the tallest building is 4 stories. And I'm walking with John going, I can't believe this. I'd like to talk with you about mysticism and what it means. But before I do, I have a question, and who are you? And we are so used to identifying with, I am a body. As I talk about this mysticism, what has happened to me is I developed a spiritual vision, and I start to see all of you as the light that you are. I can see lights in all of you, and I can see your auras. And then I see your bodysuit, and you've got a man bodysuit, you've got a woman, but it's a JCPenney suit. You are a thought of love in the mind of God. And all minds are joined. And the bottom line, mysticism, it sounds like I've got magical powers and I can do all these things. I don't. I have learned to listen to Christ, let him walk in front of me, guide me, and through that, he led me back to my oneness with God, such that I was held in God's hands. So as I talk about this process, I'm going to kind of give you tidbits of what works, what doesn't. So sort of pay attention to your own life. It's like I've got money problems, I've got relationship problems, whatever, health problems, and start to listen a little bit more carefully, because that is part of the process of being a mystic. So you are a thought in the mind of God. You are a thought of love. The easiest way that I do to remember that, I put my hand on my heart. So just do that for a second. And say, I am.
I am.
I am.
I am.
Start to feel the love that's coming into this room. Start to feel the resonance. God is starting to enter. He's starting to bring you into the present. I am love. I am divine consciousness. I am Christ consciousness. Let this body go. Let these problems go. Let New York go. And start to focus on right now, because this is right now where God is. So in your life, I do this in the ER, I will stop and say, I am. Or I am love, I am peace, I am joy. And then I like to extend it out. So as we do this talk, remember who you are. And then you'll start to see, oh, because I'm going to tell you some pretty horrific stories, and you're going to see and hear how God helped. Because you are never alone. You are forever connected to your source. And God first touches us in our heart. The very last thing when a person dies, they stop breathing, but there's always 2 heartbeats left. And this for me is, when I was a young man, I started having mystical experiences where I could see colors on people's hearts. And I'd see red, green, and blue. And everybody can see that, right? That was my assumption. And as I started saying, well, that has a, John has a blue heart, can't you see that? And so with society, ego, training, that light that's in your heart starts to get covered up. And suddenly I have to go to school and I get trained in this and I get trained in that. And I really bought into the ego big time. Very competitive, got high grades. And I ended up going to university and got a medical degree. That's like up here. Had the big house and had cars. I had success everywhere around me. I was not happy. I was not fulfilled. And I said, why, when I have everything, do I still feel empty? And so the start of my story began in 1996. When I was in church, and this church seats 1,000 people. So it was a Saturday, I did some work, and I sat in the pew, and I looked up at the cross, how beautiful it was, and I strongly desired, very important, I strongly desired to know God. And I said, God, please reveal yourself to me. If you want a nice, quick prayer, God, please reveal yourself to me. Just in the grocery store. I'm upset about the little old lady doing her thing with the bag, looking at her coupons, and God, please reveal yourself to me. God, please let your love flow through me. So in 96, I'm here, and I'm expecting lights, I'm expecting maybe flickers of candles, but nothing happened, or so I thought. So a few years later, we had this really large house, and we sold the house, we moved to Maine, and started to downsize. We had a very quiet life, had 2 boys, and I had started a new medical career as an emergency room physician. And my habit has always been, this is a little bit of a preamble, but I like to pray for people. So I have somebody that's passing away, and I believe my last job as a physician is to pray. Because a lot of times people are atheists or they're into other family members' dynamics. And so I would look around and hold their hand to my chest. And my prayer, since I was Catholic, was, Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. So I always did that as a habit for my patients. And that worked really well up until about 2004. I was promoted to be the medical director of one of the biggest hospitals in Maine. And I'm really at the top of my career, thinking life is really sweet, but I still don't feel that fullness inside of me. I'm a little bit empty. Why is that? What does it take to be happy, And in 2004 is when Christ, and I interchange Christ, Holy Spirit, God. They're all the same to me, because in reality, we are light. We are beings of pure light. We are beings of pure love. And I'll get into that in a little bit. Words do not work in the spiritual realm. I just can't say God is love, because you've all got a different definition, which means there's a different part of God. And there is only one power in everything, and that is God. Everything here is God. We are all God expressing ourselves individually. I'm a Rod Chelberg God, you know, and as I go along, my name is going to change to Christ as I mature. And every one of you, I'm going to digress for a second, what I'm going to talk about, every one of you can do, because you're all mystics. Every single one of you is a mystic. And you have just covered yourself up with the suit and the life. And it's a matter of, mysticism is unlearning this ego. And as you unlearn it, strange things start to happen. And the strange things are, you start to feel, you start to hear, you start to see things that other people don't see. So when someone comes into the emergency room and says, I'm talking to God, I'm an ER doctor. Right, you're having a schizophrenic break, you're going to go to the psychiatric hospital for a few days, and I'm going to take your rights away. Now after 10 years of doing this, I'm wondering how many saints I blue papered. And I'm like, you know, maybe I should have listened to that guy a little bit more. Maybe I made a mistake. So in 2004, my life changed dramatically, and it crashed. Everything was taken away from me in a matter of 6 months. So my wife was involved with another very close family member and decided to divorce me. I had no clue that this was coming, and a very close friend of the family, and devastating. So it's being whacked by that 2x4 that Christ uses on occasion. And sometimes Alistair Hardy wrote that the most common entry into mysticism is the crash and burn experience. About 83% of people need some kind of upset trauma to break this hard shell. It hurt like hell. 3 months after she had immediate divorce, 3 months after that, I lost my boys. She took them to Virginia. In the state of Maine, 10% of men get custody of their children. So now my boys, who I love dearly, are 1,500 miles away. This put me into a horrendous depression, despair. It was a cycle that just would not stop. I said, when does this end? The medicines don't work. Counseling's not working. And I woke up one morning. I woke up crying because the pain was so deep. And I'm telling you this so that you understand how deep pain can be. And I walked downstairs and I saw my kitchen table knives sitting there, and I had the solution to my pain. I said, I know how to end this. So I took my shirt off and I took my long knife and I put it here on the apex of my chest. And I know exactly where to put a knife. And I angled the knife down, and I thought, with one push, within seconds, I'm dead, and my pain is going to be gone. So I'm contemplating this. I'm standing there, ready, and I hear a voice. And the voice is always in this ear, and it was the voice of Christ. And Christ said, let's go for a walk first. So I put the knife down, I went for a walk, walked about a half mile, I was crying the whole time, came back, and it's like, well, that didn't work. I picked up the knife, put it to my chest, and I said, okay, I'm getting ready. Christ came again and said, let's go for another walk. And I put the knife back down, and this time he whispered and talked to me in my ear clearly. He said, I am here for you. And I wrote about this in the book. It was my crash and burn experience. But your boys are going to need you. You have angels watching over you. And I could feel an arm wrapping around my shoulder, a very loving presence, a fullness, and the pain started to evaporate. And I got down and I stopped. I said, I can't do this alone. The ego says, I can do this alone. And we make this mistake of saying, I'm an ego, I can lift all these weights. And that's such a hard way to live. It is much easier when you say, I need help. And I'm down on my knees. That's as close as I care to get to the bottom. It's like within seconds. That's pretty close to ending your life. Christ then walked with me back, and always now Christ whispers in this ear. And he's very audible. It's my voice, but it's not my thought. And so with this talk, I'm going to tell you what I started to do so that I could hear Christ more often. So I got through the divorce. I won custody. I got back on my feet. And the nice thing about the divorce is it brought me A Course in Miracles. So I was reading Wayne Dyer's book on spirit, and he was studying A Course in Miracles, and I thought, is that god-awful book that came out back in whatever, the 70s or something? I tried to read it. No author. I got through 3 pages, and I said, this is ridiculous. The world's not real? Come on. So I threw it out. Well, now I picked it up, and that book grabbed me and would not let me go. I could not stop reading it. I started reading Ken Wapnick and eventually John, and eventually Way of Mastery, A Course of Mari Peron's Course in Love. But that particular book would not let me go. I started writing the lessons down in a note card, 4x6 card. I'd put them in my pocket. And I'd read the lesson, and it says, every 5 minutes have this thought. And I'm thinking, I'm in an ER. And I'm supposed to stop every five minutes and pray. No, that doesn't work. It really does. You get 5 ambulances at once. It's like, you're very busy. But what I did is I would put my hand in my pocket and just I could feel the presence coming. So that started. The second thing that started is my chaotic mind. The meds, I said, they're not working, they're not helping. And I tried going to church, and that didn't work. I just couldn't do it. And I started meditating. Now, I don't know how to meditate, so I would sit in the chair and just start to breathe and relax. And all of a sudden, this warm presence would come and start to guide me, and I learned to breathe. So now I'm reading the Course once or twice a day, something that's helping me to unlearn this world, something that's reminding me that God loves me. God walks in front of me. I don't have to do this by myself. And I thought, this is very interesting because I'm starting to get filled up inside. Okay, I can do this. I started to have very interesting experiences in the ER that I'd like to share with you now. These are in the book, most of them. These are real life, true stories. I'm not making them up. When you're in dire straits, which is like every 5 minutes in the ER, you start to learn to listen. So the very first thing that I became aware of was the presence of Christ. Now, I told you before, I always used to pray for patients, and I'd always feel something, but I didn't know what it was. I'm just, But I always started to feel this warm presence. And what happened is the world started to change on me. The world would start to go like a movie. You know how movies used to be in frames. They go. It is very stunning to watch the world do this, and what was that? And what I call that in the book is a frame shift. And I started to see that this world is not real. And during those frame shifts that I started to have, where the world went, and that's when Christ would enter. And I'd start to feel his presence. And once I was driving, and the whole world tilted 45 degrees, and it gets very startling. They go away, but that was my experience. So that started. The next thing that started to happen was I started to hear Christ in this ear telling me what to do to save someone's life. And people say, you know, you're one of the smartest doctors I've met. And I go, no, I'm not that smart. I'm really not. But I know how to listen. And it's really nice when you have a consult with Christ right there. So I have a lady, 40 years old, very well dressed. She's comes in by ambulance. She's critical. She's dying. No trauma. She collapsed at work. What happened? I have no information. I don't know what drug she's on, what the medical problems are. This is very common in the ER. People collapse. They're dying. Doctor, it's time for you to do your thing. So I've got the paramedics, I've got the nurses, and Christ whispers in my ear, and he says, push on her foot. Okay, so everybody's looking at me. I walk up, and I go up to her foot, and I push, and her foot goes tap, tap, tap. And Christ said, see, she has clonus. She has brain poisoning, and the brain poisoning is from Tylenol. Just about that clear is what Christ said to me that I heard. I didn't examine the patient. I went and I ordered a stat Tylenol level, a stat ammonia level, a few other labs. The nurses are going crazy. Doctor, you haven't even, she's dying. And you walk off, and of course, within half an hour, those two labs were critically high, lethal, and she was going to die. So I immediately gave her the antidotes. Still haven't examined her, still haven't asked any questions. Saved her life. 3 days later, she walked out, and she came up, and just like you and me. And it turned out she was taking Tylenol that had a pain mixed in with it, and then extra Tylenol over the counter to help control her pain. Well, the liver can't detoxify that. It became liver poisoning, and it was going to kill her. Tylenol is not a routine lab that you order, so it saved her life. And what you find is that if you learn in these critical situations, this is where I digress a bit, but no matter what the problem is, whether you lose your glasses in your car or your money for the day, you have to be calm and listen. A 15-year-old boy came in to the ER, and he was playing in the schoolyard. He fell down, scun his knees. Not a big deal, right? And so after dinner, Mom said, I wonder if there's something wrong with my child. Brings him into the ER, and I'm looking at this thinking, oh God, a kid, 15 years old, he fell down. I am so busy with ambulances and strokes, but I reached over, and the minute I touched the child, Christ said, this child just had a heart attack because he has a disease that's called metabolic syndrome. And that's why he passed out, is because he had an abnormal heart rhythm. I stopped my exam at that point. My nurses looked at me and I said, you are ordering a cardiac workup, which is what I do for adults, on a 15-year-old kid. That's insanity. You don't do that. And yet I did. The test comes back, it's 10 times normal. It should be 0. It was up 3.5 something, off the wall. And immediately we started the child on cardiac medications, sent him to Boston, and they did an emergency look at his heart with a catheter. And it turned out he had a 95% closure of his left main artery. And we call that the widowmaker in medicine, because you are going to die. So they put his stent in, saved his life. But Christ very specifically said, get a cardiac enzyme test. He had a heart attack. And so those are just two examples. And I don't want to fill this up with stories, but you have to get comfortable listening to that voice. And it's a very quiet voice. I digress for a second. The ego likes to say, I think, therefore I am. right? You've heard that saying, I think, therefore I am. And God says, I am. You see the difference? So when you're thinking, is it here, is it there, should I do this, should I do that? Should I send this kid home? Why do a cardiac workup? So stop thinking. The second thing that started to happen is I started to see Christ in the ER. And Christ, even to this day, in this realm, Christ is about 4 foot, like a bead-shaped red aura cloud, if that makes sense. I don't see him in a robe and a beard and a stick, and I see him as red light, as love, as who he truly is. So I have, just excuse me. Ambulance call. I have an 80-year-old woman coming in who's in cardiac arrest, and they're doing CPR. So I received her, and I assumed the code, and I started CPR on this lady. And she was in what's called asystole. She had no heartbeat whatsoever for 20 minutes. So I called the code. I said, everybody, we're stopping. We're going to be done, and let her go. And everybody's walking out, and I've got to go tell the family that, you know, their mom didn't make it. But I was standing there, the gurney is right here, and I picked up her hand, and I told you I like to pray. Well, this time I had a thought, and the Course says death is not real. And I wonder, what would happen if I asked Christ to come? That was my thought. So I stood there and waited, and all of a sudden, everything changed. The whole room, now here you see color, you see all the different shades. Well, a spiritual vision came to me, and everything became white on white, and I could see the energy of life in everything. And it didn't matter if it was a piece of equipment, it scintillated in light. It didn't matter if it was a person. Everything became this beautiful aura of white. And then I felt this loving presence enter the room. Here's the gurney. Christ comes as a red aura up to this lady. And I see her white outline of a human. And she leans up and she smiles to me and says, thank you. Christ picked her up, and they meld together. Christ is here, she's here, and they go across, and then these golden doors, these beautiful golden doors open, and 2 arms came out, brought them together, and the doors shut, and it faded away. It's hard to describe. Time and space change, but this is what happened. And then the room was just scintillating white, and I felt the most profound peace and love. And I wanted so much to look in those doors, but they shut before I could. That scenario has repeated itself every single time now. I have seen over 70,000 people in my career, 28 years. I have attended hundreds of deaths, literally holding people's hands or being at home praying for them. And that visualization has always been the same, that Christ has always come. Never has he not come. And so I still had these experiences in the ER where I would have these problems. The second thing that I'd like to tell you is a young child came into the ER, a year-and-a-half-old child, and he was in severe respiratory distress. It was the end of my shift. I wanted to go home. I'm tired, that's it. And my partner, who's a pediatrician, I do not like kids. They scream, they throw up on me. It's not fun. So he said, Rod, I'm really behind. This kid, go take a look at him. So the child is sitting on his mom's lap in diapers. He's doing a fast respiratory rate. And as I sit down and I'm getting ready to examine the child, the x-ray comes up on the machine, and I see he has bilateral pneumonia. And I thought, okay, this kid's really in trouble. So as I looked over, the child is sitting right here against mom. She's sheet white in terror. And the child takes his last breath, leans forward on his mom's chest, and dies. Now I'm sitting here, and I saw the aura, the white aura of the child, start to float. And the child's thought was, shall I leave this world? Am I done? Christ came as a red aura and said to me, Rod, put your hand on the baby's back. So I put my hand on the baby's back, and Christ, no words were spoken, but he said, stay, little one. And the aura melted back in. The child started breathing. I called a pediatric code blue. We resuscitated the child and saved his life. So by learning to stay calm and learning to listen, things happen. So I first was aware of the presence of Christ. Then I started to hear Christ. And then I started to see Christ. So now I'm at the end of my ER career. It's that's enough. My last day, I had 5 ambulances. A big trauma came in, and it's not, hello, how you doing? Did you have a good weekend? Here's 5 charts. There's 5 ambulances. They're all banged up. They're all yours. Get to work. And I said, I'm really glad that this has come to an end. I've had a great career. There's stories in the book, other stories that are there, but I want to move on. The next thing that I'd like to talk about is the reality of death. Is death real? And people would say, well, what's wrong with you? Of course it's real. They're alive one minute, they're dead the next, we bury them. That's the tradition. But the question that I would ask is, okay, I just watched Christ birth someone into heaven, and that's the process, I call it, is you are birthing someone into heaven. So I want to give you some examples and maybe convince you that maybe death isn't real. So the first lady that I want to talk about, her name was Anna. And Anna was 73. She had pancreatic cancer, and I admitted her hospice. Let me back up. I was the medical director for 4 nursing homes, so there was 80 patients in each nursing home. And I ran Beacon Hospice, and we fluctuated between 120 to 150 patients. So my competitors would have 30 patients, just to give you a ballpark. So it's tremendous workload. And as John said, yes, I was signing death certificates every day. And you would think, you know, there's something wrong with this doctor. There's so many people dying on him. Maybe I don't want to see him. But it was just like, well, they need to have a funeral, and they can't do that until the death certificate's done. So yes, first part of my morning, I'd be filling out death certificates. And I think my worst day was 5 by noon. And I said, I need a break. And then they stopped after that. But so Anna had pancreatic cancer, and she went through treatment and not going to make it. She failed everything. So I admitted her, and Anna had 2 questions for me. And the first question was, what is it like to die? The doctor, tell me, what is that like? And then the second question is, I'm an atheist. What is going to happen to me? Is this it? There's nothing? Or is this thing that we talk about called God, is it real? I don't know. Don't go to church. I don't do any of that. So I answered the first question, what is it like to die? As a hospice director, I would use medications to keep people comfortable, but I never snowed them. I never gave them so much that they were unconscious, just enough to bring them peace. And I said, you are going to be very comfortable. Your fear is going to be gone. You're going to feel the presence of warmth. And then you're going to get very tired, and you're going to fall asleep. Your body is going to float for a little while, which I've seen many times. that slight dissociation, and then you're just going to turn back into light. I said, you are going to turn back into your divine essence, and that is you are love. You are pure energy, you are pure light. So she was very happy with that. The second question, I'm an atheist. What's going to happen to me? I said, as I just told you, you are a thought of love in the mind of God. Life is eternal. Your divine essence is not going to die. This body suit that you're wearing is going to die. It's meant to die. It's not real. It's not sustainable. So God is energy. God is love. God is consciousness. I used words that she could understand, and not the Catholic notion of God, which is damnation, hellfire, and oh, you've sinned with born original sin. It didn't work with her. But I said, you are love, and you're going to return to love, and love is eternal. So when I said that, the room suddenly became filled with these beautiful white orbs, different sizes, floating around the room. And she's like, what is this? And I said, these are angels. These are angels of love that are coming here to help you. So Anna progressed along for about another 4 months. In about a week before somebody passes away is when I start to see Christ. And I asked Christ to be there. So Christ was here at her bedside, just very patiently waiting. He is so kind and so gentle, so patient. And all you feel is you walk into the room and you feel this deep peace. And you're going, oh, what is that? What just happened? But it's a palpable peace that you feel. And Christ is on the scene, as I say. On the Friday before she died, the family had bought her tulips. The top of the tulips are white and the bottom were red. So they're variegated. And all the tulips were closed. So she's been unresponsive now for several days. She wakes up totally lucid Friday morning, talked to her family for 2 hours, just as clear as you and I are talking, telling them how much she loved them, how thankful she was to be their mom, and all the great things they did, and all the mistakes. She says, it doesn't matter. The tulips opened. The tulips opened. She lasted about 2 hours and fell asleep, and she did not wake after that. The following Saturday, the very next Saturday, the next day, I'm in my house, and I have a long island, a countertop, and it's about 2 o'clock in the afternoon. And so now imagine there's a counter here, and I see Anna, perfect outline of Anna, and there's Christ with his arm around her, walking with her like this. And Anna is always a jokester, walks by, blows me a kiss. And I stood there and I was filled with such joy. How can you cry at a time when you've just watched love's presence reunite with itself? The doors, yes, the doors were there. Again, the arms, these loving arms. I digress for a second. God takes the final step in this journey. God does the final welcoming home. And I'll talk about that in a little bit. And I lean forward, and nope, click. The door shut again. I went, all right, fine. So, is death real? Betty had end-stage lung disease, couldn't breathe, and she was a devout Christian, went to church, and she was terrified of death. She said, am I good enough for God? Is God going to take me home? Now, she's thinking of a Roman Catholic, Old Testament type God, and had a lot of fear and a lot of resistance. And I said, Betty, I talked again with her and I said, God is waiting for you. Relax. Death is a choice point. And if you can die in peace and put that baggage down through we call forgiveness, put it down and die in peace, it's very easy to go home. It's like the game Monopoly, where it says go to jail, but the card says go to heaven. It's different. It's a different game we play here. So I talked with her, and finally she relaxed into the presence of love. And I felt her, and I felt Christ. I wasn't at the home, but all of a sudden, this tremendous feeling of peace came over me. And I went, thank you, thank you. Gratitude for what I just witnessed. And because I can see it in my mind. Roger is another patient. He had end-stage alcohol disease, and he had all of the problems. He was violent. He was arrested. He was in Vietnam, so he saw a lot of trauma. He killed people, and so he used alcohol to self-medicate. Totally broke up his family, and this is in Maine. I'm an old-fashioned doctor. I still made house calls. And so it's February, middle of winter. It's very dark out there, and you really need a truck, which I was very glad because the driveway's 100 feet up the hill. And I thought if I get stuck out here, I'm going to be joining Roger very soon. I mean, it is really isolated. So I'm in this log cabin. Roger's in bed lying down, and he's trembling. And his thought was, what have you done with the love that I gave you? That was his thought. I betrayed God. I was horrible to my family. I made all of these sins. Guilt was piling up on him. His wife was right here, and all they had were kerosene lamps. So I sat down with Roger, and I took his hand, and I said, let me help guide you home. And I started to say, I, Roger, forgive myself. I, Roger, start to forgive my wife. I, Roger, forgive all of the problems I've done in my life. Now, it took a while. Roger was shaking and trembling. I, Roger. It took a while, and suddenly he started to tremble. His whole body started to shake, and he started crying. And he looked to his wife and said, I am so sorry. I am so sorry. I did the best I could. I forgive you. Roger felt love's presence, and he put all of that baggage that we consider negative, horrible people down. In that moment, as I'm holding hand, Roger's wife is holding hands, and he's looking at her. And God spoke to me, to Roger. And I call this Roger's Prayer. And it's in the book. I'd like to read it to you. Roger's Prayer. God literally spoke through me. Out of love you were born, free to create and explore this life. And now it is time to return to spirit, to love and to peace. Forever are you sinless and free of guilt, for I have loved you always. The memories of your life will end with this body and trouble you no more. Your light will shine again because you are still one with me. So Roger heard that prayer and fell in love with his wife all over again. He passed away about a month later, and his wife said that night, she said, I fell in love with him, and he became the man I fell in love with 30 years ago. Totally clean. That's the power of forgiveness, the power of love. And when sometimes God will come through and speak to you in that manner. Last one I want to tell you about is my dad, who is a stout atheist. And I always get my ears burned off about churches and cemeteries and why is there a God and why are people being killed and Why are there poor people? Dad, I don't know. It's not my God. My God is pure love. But try to tell him that, he says, there's something wrong with my son. So it was always a one-sided conversation of, okay, this is fun. But my dad finally one day said, I'm all done. I'm tired. I want to end. And so about a month later, he had the most beautiful decline in his health, smooth and peaceful, and I put him into a hospice, private setting, and stayed with him. He was lucid for 3 days, and then he started to go to sleep, no longer eating, and adjusted his medications, and yeah, he left. On the day he left, I was looking at him and I said, everybody, we have to go to lunch. Now, it's a very private time for people who die. They don't want you around sometimes. They want to die, and you walk out of the room, and I just go to the bathroom, and you come back, and your loved one is gone. Very common. They want the privacy. They came in this world by themselves. They want to leave, and they want to leave in peace, and they don't want to hurt you. So Dad did that, but I caught him. So I came back in. He was no longer breathing, and I saw the last 2 pulsations in his neck. Let me back up just a little bit. 3 days before that, the aura of Christ appeared on Dad's right side, and he's now unresponsive. And I thought, all right, and I'm reading Course in Miracles just to myself, and a little bit out loud. And I came in about 2 days before he died, and there's 6 white auras on the edge of the bed. And I thought, well, who are these people? I had no idea, but there are 6 entities standing there. And then I looked and I said, wait a second. The tallest one, my Uncle Vernon, was like 6'5". And Dad was a family of 7. He was the very last one. And as I looked, I started to see the faces. His family came to bring him home. Very common that, and I didn't write about this, but one lady had breast cancer, and I was talking to her, and I said, do you know there's a lady up there, older woman, looking at you? And she goes, oh yes, that's my grandmother, and she's here to help heal me. And I said, hello. And she said hello back, and just a warm, loving presence, but she was there to help. So there's Dad with his family, and all there for him. I come the next day, everybody's gone. Christ is gone, the family's gone, the body is still there, it's still breathing and ticking away. And I went, oh. Now I think of the human body as a car, and I think of myself as a glorified auto mechanic. See? Does it bother you to turn your car off and step out? Does it bother you? You don't think anything of that. Well, what if you've misidentified and think your body is your car, and you turn that off and you think, oh, now my car is dead, I'm dead. But it's not true. You as a spirit have left. So Dad's body had some gas in it, and it was just running on empty. And I said, all right, we got a little gas left in the tank. But so the next day he passed away, and I saw the last 2 pulsations in his neck, and I tapped his chest, and I said, have you left us? And yeah, he did. He had left. So there were nurses, there was family in the room, everybody was starting to cry, and I felt the tremendous pain of loss deep in my heart. But then I felt tremendous love. Tremendous love. So I walked to the head of the bed, and I picked up the Course in Miracles. And my favorite lesson is I rest in God. So I start to read, I rest in God to my father. All of a sudden, the most beautiful aura of my dad appeared on my side, scintillating white light. And he was pure joy, just radiant love. And he just stood there, smiled. And I knew what he was thinking. It's like, I was wrong. This is not what I thought God was. And when I finished the lesson, he gave me a message, which I'm not going to read, but it's in the book, about saying goodbye. And then he left. And so he's waiting. He's waiting. So, is death real? Have you changed your mind a little bit that maybe it's not? Maybe this vehicle is just a car? Somebody dies, they weigh 150 pounds when they're alive. I'm holding their hand, I can feel their movements, and all of a sudden they're not breathing, they've died. They still weigh 150 pounds. So what's changed? Well, their thought of consciousness, their concept of a body has left. And with Christ there, they return to love's presence. And I know every one of them has gone home. So now I'm going to change subject a little bit. I'm going to go back to my life. I'm doing my meditations, I'm doing my ER work, and I'm doing my hospice work. Something new is starting to happen in my life. And that is, I'm starting to dissociate from my body. So I'm sitting here in my chair, and I can't bend my knee, and I can't get into these yoga positions. So I have a cup of coffee, and I read. And then, after a while, I start to float. And I started to learn what's called astral travel. And I started taking trips around the world at incredible speeds. At incredible speeds. You can't hear anything, you can't feel anything, but you are totally one with everything. You see it, you feel it, you know it. It's like, I am this earth, I am these people. So I would see forests, I would see mountains and lakes, and then more and more. And then I started to expand my mind even farther. Went past the moon. I went inside the sun. And to see the plasma energy of the sun colliding, giving off energy and light, is dazzling. It's beautiful. And not to feel it, not to hurt it. It's like, this is really interesting. I started to travel even farther. I went past Jupiter. I started to go through the Milky Way. And it's just like I'm looking here, but this is all the Milky Way. What's happening is my mind is starting to expand beyond the boundaries of this limited human concept that we've got 5 senses, a body, and a life. What I found in time is that Christ was pulling me and guiding me on these journeys. So I kept going farther and farther, and the Milky Way started getting smaller and smaller, and Christ became my constant companion, always right here with me. Eventually I got to the point where I started to float above all of the stars. And one day I came to this big waterfall of curtains, just a waterfall of curtains, and the stars are all below me, and I'm standing on this precipice, and I looked down and I said, if I try to jump across this to that waterfall, which is where I wanted to go, it's too far to jump, I'm going to die. No doubt in my mind that would be it. An interesting thing happened. Christ reached through and said, I'll catch you. And I went, and I jumped. I totally trusted Christ, and I jumped. And what happened in that instant, and I call that the edge of the separated mind, is he pulled me through this very thin veil. I didn't get wet, nothing happened, except all concepts of rod, time, space, all were stripped off of me. And I became a thought of truth, of love. I was perfectly clear light, and Christ was right with me as one. I entered, that's heaven, I entered a huge white sphere, just unbelievable how beautiful it is, but the dimensions are, your mind expands to such incredible distances. there's such tremendous peace and quiet, and all thoughts of Rod were gone. There's just like, I know where I'm going, and it's beautiful. So for about a year, I was taking these trips with Christ, and we would just commune together, just like two friends, and enjoying this presence. I wrote about a few things that happened, but I don't want to talk about them. They're minor. One day, Christ said to me, "Do you want to meet God?" Now that stopped me. That stopped me big time, because I'm thinking, for whatever reason, we're still connected to the human body. There's this silvery cord that's still connected. And all these memories of church started coming through, of hellfire and damnation and guilt and all of this stuff. And I thought to myself, wait a second, I have a choice. And Christ is here. I trust Christ. He's never lied to me. And I decided, so I answered Christ. I said, yes, I would like to meet God. And he said, okay, you're ready. So I stood there and I imagined this body dissolving, the clothes coming off, all of my concepts, all of my thoughts. And I stood there totally naked, totally at peace, and said, God, I'm ready. Reveal yourself. So I'm waiting very quietly and patiently, and the most beautiful mystic white arms came out and started to wrap me up like a blanket. And I suddenly became an infant, and I became love. God held me in his arms. I do not have human words to describe that experience. They talk in the Bible about peace that passes all understanding. There is no sound. Such love. It's unbelievable, the depth of that love. And then such tremendous power, such tremendous safety, security. And it's like, I am home, and I am awake, and I am looking into the eyes of God, and God is looking into the eyes of me. Now, that's not exactly how it happened, but that's the best I can do, But I wrote about the experience because God is experience. And if you've never tasted an orange, and I'm trying to tell you what an orange tastes like, well, it's sweet, it's juicy, it's good, makes a little bit of a mess, you have no idea. But when you taste an orange, you go, now I know. I now know God, and I now know we are one, beyond a shadow of a doubt. Now the ego is going to pick at me here and there, but I know I'm one. So I wrote Being Caressed by Love. It's in the book. It's 2:45. So I got 2 minutes, John. To be loved at that level is beyond comprehension, and that's where you are going. Study this book. Be quiet. Learn to trust. Learn to listen. Be open. You will not be led astray. Let Christ do the heavy lifting. And I guarantee you, you're going to come to that line, and God is going to reach out, and he's going to pull you in and say, you are loved. You complete me. We are whole. We now have eternal life. We now have eternal peace. So I'll end with that for this section. Thank you.